The rain pounded down on Route 66 that March night, turning the asphalt into a black mirror that reflected the car lights like shooting stars. Eleanor Thompson, an anthropology professor at Harvard University, was returning from a lecture in Boston, her thoughts divided between the conference she had just attended and the stack of papers waiting to be graded at home. The radio played a soft Brazilian pop song in the background as she tried to stay focused on the slippery road. At 45, Eleanor had built a respectable career studying ancient symbols and their cultural meanings. It was ironic how fate sometimes weaves its webs. She had no idea that in just a few minutes her life, and everything she thought she knew about symbols, would change forever. "Professor Eleanor, don't you think you're going too far with this theory?" A student's question from earlier that day still echoed in her mind. She had presented a controversial paper on how ancient symbols influenced collective behavior even millennia after their origins. The academic community considered her approach too mystical for a social scientist. A sudden flash cut through the night, followed by the deafening sound of skidding tires. Eleanor watched, as if in slow motion, as an out-of-control truck barreled toward her. Instinctively, she turned the wheel to avoid it, but it was too late. The impact was violent and instantaneous. The world spun several times before everything went dark. When Eleanor opened her eyes again, she was floating above her own body, observing the surreal scene below. Paramedics worked frantically around what remained of her car, now a twisted mass of metal. "She's in cardiac arrest. Start the resuscitation." "Protocol," shouted one of the responders, his hands rhythmically pressing against her lifeless chest. Eleanor watched it all with an inexplicable calm. She felt no fear, no pain, only a scientific curiosity about what was happening. Was this how a near-death experience manifested? As an anthropologist, she had studied similar accounts across different cultures, but experiencing it was entirely different. A soft light began to envelop her, unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't blinding but welcoming, like an embrace made of pure energy. And then she began to rise, leaving behind the scene of the accident, the sounds of sirens growing increasingly distant. As she ascended, fragments of her life passed before her eyes. Her childhood in Miami, playing on the beach with her parents, her rebellious teenage years when she decided she wanted to study ancient cultures, the failed marriage that ended when she chose her academic career, the sleepless nights preparing lectures and grading papers, the students who became friends. Over the years, the light grew more and more intense, but instead of blinding her, it seemed to clear her mind. Symbols began to appear around her, some familiar from her research, others completely unknown. They floated and intertwined like a cosmic dance, each emanating its own energy that she could not only see but feel. "Eleanor," a voice called, reverberating not through the air, but directly in her consciousness. It was impossible to tell if it was male or female, young or ancient. It was all these things and none of them at the same time. "Your studies have only scratched the surface," the voice continued. "The symbols are not just cultural representations as you teach. They are portals, bridges between dimensions, keys that can open or close doors in reality." Thousands of images flooded her mind. People throughout history using symbols to channel energies, establish connections with higher planes, influence the course of events. She saw how some of these symbols, originally sacred, had been corrupted and turned into tools of manipulation and control. "You have a rare gift, Eleanor. You can see beyond appearances, feel the energies behind the symbols. It is time to use this gift for a greater purpose." "But how?" she tried to ask, her mental voice trembling at the magnitude of what she was experiencing. "Return, teach, but not just the history of the symbols. Show their true power, their original purpose. Help people realize how they are being influenced without even noticing. There is a battle happening on subtle planes, and you are now part of it." Eleanor felt a wave of responsibility wash over her being. All her research, all her studies now seemed like preparation for something greater. The criticism she received for her mystical theories no longer mattered. She had seen the truth with her own eyes. "But remember," the voice warned, "knowledge brings responsibility. Some will not want to listen. Others will try to stop your work. Stay firm in your mission." The light began to fade, and Eleanor felt herself being pulled back. The symbols around her started to vanish, but their energies remained etched into her soul as if branded by fire. "She's coming back!" She heard the distant voice of the paramedic. "We have a pulse." The pain returned like an explosion, along with the noise of sirens and the smell of rain and wet asphalt. But something had fundamentally changed within her. When she opened her eyes, Eleanor Thompson was no longer just an anthropology professor. She was a guardian of ancient knowledge, a bridge between worlds, and her true journey was only just beginning. The smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors were the first sensations Eleanor registered as she awoke in the ICU of Mount Sinai Hospital. The fluorescent light hurt her eyes, but not as much as the images still dancing. In her mind, ancient symbols pulsating with life, secrets whispered by a voice echoing with the wisdom of the ages. "Dr. Eleanor?" The soft voice of Nurse Mary interrupted her thoughts. "It's good to see you awake. I'll call the doctor." While she waited, Eleanor tried to organize her memories. The accident, the out-of-body experience, the revelation about the symbols. It all seemed both surreal and more real than the reality around her. Her hands instinctively touched the pendant she always wore around her neck, a gift from her grandmother, a crystal wrapped in a weave of silver threads. "It's a miracle you're alive," said Dr. Richard as he entered the room, flipping through her medical chart. "You were technically dead for almost 4 minutes." "I know," Eleanor replied, her voice hoarse. "I saw everything." The doctor exchanged a meaningful glance with the nurse, that look healthcare professionals reserve for patients who talk about near-death experiences, a mix of compassion and scientific skepticism. "I need paper and a pen," Eleanor requested, feeling an inexplicable urgency. When Mary brought the materials, her hands began to feverishly draw, spirals, crosses, interwoven circles, symbols she had seen during her experience. "Eleanor!" A familiar voice made her look up. Marion, her best friend and colleague from the anthropology department, stood in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. "Mary!" Eleanor tried to smile, but the movement brought a wave of pain. "How long?" "3 days," Marion replied, approaching the bed. We all thought, her voice faltered. "I need to tell you something," Eleanor interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "Everything we've researched, all our theories about symbols and their cultural impact, we've barely scratched the surface." Marion looked at the drawings scattered across the bed, recognizing some of the symbols from their joint research, but others were completely unfamiliar. "What happened to you, Eleanor?" "I saw the truth, Mary. The symbols, they're not just representations. They're portals, they're alive. And some of them—" Eleanor hesitated, aware of how her words would sound. "Some of them are being used for sinister purposes." Dr. Richard cleared his throat gently. "Dr. Eleanor, it's normal for patients to have intense experiences during—" "It's not that," Eleanor interrupted more firmly than she intended. "I'm sorry, Doctor, but what I experienced goes beyond hallucinations caused by lack of oxygen or trauma. I need to document everything before the memories start to fade." Marion picked up some of the drawings, studying them with an academic eye. "These symbols, some seem like variations of ancient protective signs, but others—" She paused, frowning at a particular drawing. "This one is different. There's something disturbing in him." "Because it was corrupted," Eleanor explained, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Like so many others, transformed from tools of spiritual elevation into instruments of control and manipulation." The heart monitor began to beep faster, reflecting her growing agitation. Dr. Richard gestured to the nurse, who quickly started adjusting something in the IV. "I think that's enough excitement for today," he said firmly. "You need to rest." "Mary," Eleanor called as her friend prepared to leave, "I need you to do something for me. In my office, the 3rd drawer, there's a red notebook with my notes on sacred symbols of Latin America. Bring it on your next visit. And—" She hesitated. "Don't mention our conversation to anyone, at least not yet." After everyone left, Eleanor stared at the drawings scattered on her bed. The medication was starting to take effect, making her thoughts foggy, but one certainty remained crystal clear. Her quiet academic life was over. A new path was opening before her, a path that promised both revelations and dangers. Before falling, asleep, she scribbled another symbol, a spiral that turned into a key. Beside it, she wrote in shaky handwriting, "It has begun." 2 weeks after the accident, Eleanor finally returned home. Her apartment in the Brooklyn neighborhood of New York felt strangely different, or maybe it was she who had changed. The walls, once decorated with reproductions of tribal art and ancient symbols that had so fascinated her students, now seemed to pulse with an energy of their own that she had never noticed before. "Are you sure you don't want me to stay?" asked Marian, placing the last bag of medications on the kitchen table. "I can sleep on the couch, I don't mind." Eleanor smiled, grateful for her friend's concern. "I need some time alone, Marie, to process everything, and to study this." She pointed to the red notebook Marian had brought from her office at the university, now covered in new notes made during her stay at the hospital. After Marian left, Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair, the one with a view of the sunset through the living room window. The notebook felt heavy in her lap, as if it contained much more than paper and ink. She opened it slowly, running her fingers over the pages where she had documented her visions. A sudden shiver ran down her spine when her eyes landed on a specific symbol, a double spiral intertwining to form something resembling a portal. She had seen it during her near-death experience, glowing with its own light as if calling to her. "Professor Victor," she murmured to herself, standing up with some difficulty. Her former doctoral advisor had a theory about dimensional portals, represented in pre-Columbian artifacts. At the time, she had considered the idea too eccentric, but now, walking over to her bookshelf, Eleanor began sifting through her old research notes. That's when she noticed something strange. Some of the books seemed to emit a subtle glow, visible only out of the corner of her eye. When she tried to look directly at them, the glow disappeared. The phone rang, making her jump. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Professor Eleanor?" A deep, urgent male voice. "My name is Raphael Johnson. I'm an archaeologist at Columbia University. I really need to speak with you about your experience." Eleanor felt her heart race. "How did you—" "You're not the only one who can see, Professor," he interrupted. "There are others like us, and we need your help. The doors are opening." A burst of static cut the call. Eleanor stared at the silent phone in her hand, a growing sense of urgency tightening her chest. She turned to her bookshelf, and this time the glow was undeniable, emanating mostly from an ancient tome on sacred symbols of Brazilian indigenous peoples. With trembling hands, Eleanor opened the book. The pages began to turn on their own, as if moved by a non-existent breeze, until they stopped at an illustration that made her blood run cold. It was the exact same symbol she had drawn at the hospital, the spiral that transformed into a key. Beneath the illustration, a note in old-fashioned handwriting read, "The portal of St. Thomas. Where the apostle walked, the marks remained. The path will open when the chosen awaken." Eleanor remembered the stories about St. Thomas, the apostle who supposedly visited Brazil before the Portuguese, leaving footprints in stones along the coast. She had always considered it a legend, an attempt by the Jesuits to create a connection between Christianity and the indigenous peoples. But now, her hands began to tingle, and a familiar energy, the same she had felt during her near-death experience, began to fill the room. The symbols in the book seemed to come alive, dancing before her eyes. "The chosen ones shall awaken," she repeated aloud. The sudden understanding struck her. Her accident had not been a coincidence, it was a calling, an awakening. And that archaeologist, Raphael Johnson, there were others like her. The sound of footsteps in the hallway brought her back to reality. It was almost 11 p.m., too late for visitors. The footsteps stopped in front of her door, but no one knocked. Eleanor approached silently, her heart pounding in her chest. Through the peephole, she saw a hooded figure standing in the hallway. The person, if it was a person, slowly raised their head, revealing not a face but a swirling vortex of glowing symbols that seemed to float in the air. Staggering back, Eleanor felt the world spin. The walls of her apartment seemed to distort, the symbols in her decorations coming to life. The last thing she saw before fainting was the red notebook on her table opening by itself, its pages glowing with a supernatural light. Eleanor woke to the gentle touch of hands on her face. As she opened her eyes, she found Marion and a stranger leaning over her. The man had deep eyes and graying hair, and he wore a shirt with patterns she immediately recognized as Tupi-Guarani symbols. "Raphael Johnson," he introduced himself, helping her sit up. "I apologize if I frightened you earlier. It was not my intention for the manifestation to be so intense." "The manifestation?" Eleanor asked, her head still spinning. "That figure in the hallway?" "It was a projection," Raphael explained. "An ancient method of communication among the chosen, but you're not fully ready to receive them yet." Marion, who had returned to check on Eleanor after a troubling premonition, looked from one to the other with growing concern. "Can someone explain what's going on? Eleanor, do you know this man?" "He called me earlier today," Eleanor replied, carefully standing up. "He said there are others like me who can see the living symbols," Raphael finished. "We're a small but growing group. Your accident, Professor Eleanor, was no coincidence. It was a calling." Eleanor walked over to her bookshelf, where the book on indigenous symbolism was still open to the page about the portal of St. Thomas. "Do you recognize this mark?" Raphael stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with recognition. "The portal. So you've already found it. This confirms everything." He turned to Eleanor with a serious expression. "Professor, what I'm about to tell you will sound insane, but after your experience, I believe you're ready to hear it." "It can't get crazier than seeing symbols come to life," she replied with a tense smile. "The ancient peoples of the Americas," Raphael began, "didn't just create symbols, they channeled cosmic energies through them. Every mark, every drawing was a key to dimensions beyond our understanding. St. Thomas, as the Jesuits called him, wasn't a Christian apostle, but a guardian of that knowledge." Marion, who had been listening in silence until then, interrupted. "Wait, are you talking about the St. Thomas with the footprints on the rocks? Those marks along the coast?" "Exactly," Raphael confirmed. "The so-called footprints are actually dormant portals, and now, after centuries, they're awakening, just like those chosen to protect them." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine as she remembered the visions during her near-death experience. The voice. It said there's a battle happening in the subtle planes. "And there is," Raphael said gravely. "There are groups that want to use these portals for their own purposes. They're trying to corrupt the sacred symbols, turning them into tools of power and control. Like that disturbing symbol you drew at the hospital," Marion added, sudden understanding dawning on her face. Eleanor walked to the window, gazing. At the nighttime city below, New York looked different now, as if a new layer of reality had been superimposed over the familiar metropolis. How many chosen ones are there?" "So far, we've identified 12 in Brazil," Raphael replied. "Each awakened in a different way. You are the 13th. "A significant number," Eleanor murmured, years of studying numerological symbolism echoing in her mind. "We need you, Professor," Raphael continued, "your academic knowledge combined. With your newfound gift, you could be the key to understanding what's coming." At that moment, all the lights in the apartment flickered simultaneously. The red notebook on the table began to vibrate, its pages flipping rapidly. In the center of the room, the air seemed to condense, forming a familiar pattern, a spiral, that transformed into a key. "It's starting," Raphael whispered, his voice barely containing his excitement. "The first portal is manifesting." "Where?" Eleanor asked, even though she already knew the answer in her heart. "San Diego," he replied, "where it all began, where the first mark was left." Marion, who had been watching the scene with wide eyes, finally found her voice. "Eleanor, you're not thinking of getting involved in this, are you? You've barely recovered from the accident." But Eleanor was already in motion, grabbing the red notebook and a few specific books from her shelf. "Marion, You've always supported my craziest theories about symbols having real power. Now I know they were more than just theories. I can't ignore this. Then I'm coming with you, Marian declared firmly. Raphael shook his head. It's dangerous for the unchosen. She's going, Eleanor interrupted, her voice brooking no argument. Marian has valuable knowledge about pre-Columbian symbols, and more importantly, I trust her with my life. The air in the room grew denser, charged with an almost palpable energy. The symbols on the wall seemed to pulse in unison, as if responding to an ancient and powerful call. We have to go now, Raphael urged. The manifestation window for the portal is limited, and we're not the only ones who know about it. Eleanor exchanged a final glance with Marian, who nodded silently. As she grabbed her bag and the car keys, a thought crossed her mind. Her quiet academic life was truly over. A new journey was beginning, one that blended the mystical and the scientific, the ancient and the modern, the known and the inexplicable. And this time there was no turning back. The drive to San Diego via Interstate 95 was silent, each occupant of the car lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor was at the wheel, still feeling some pain from the accident, but determined. Beside her, Raphael constantly consulted an old leather-bound journal. In the back seat, Marian alternated between taking notes on her tablet and casting worried glances at her friend. There, Raphael pointed when they spotted the exit sign for San Diego. The mark we're looking for is in a rarely visited area of the beach. The local fishermen avoid the place. They say the waters there are different. The sky was beginning to lighten when they arrived at the location, a secluded cove surrounded by rocks. The tide was low, revealing rocky formations covered in algae and barnacles. On one of them, partially submerged during high tide, was the famous mark, a depression in the stone that to untrained eyes might look like a giant footprint. But for Eleanor it was much more. The mark pulsed with a bluish light that seemed to come from within the rock itself, and around it, ancient symbols danced in the air like small constellations. "Are you seeing this?" she asked, amazed. "The symbols?" "Yes," Raphael replied, "but Marian probably only sees the mark on the stone." Marian nodded in confirmation, her scientific eyes studying the rocky formation. "The composition of the stone is interesting. It doesn't seem natural to the region." "Because it's not," Raphael explained, stepping closer to the mark. "These stones were brought here, placed specifically to create a network of portals along the coast." Eleanor felt something strange as she approached the mark, a vibration that resonated with something inside her. Instinctively, she took out the crystal she wore around her neck, the one her grandmother had given her. To her surprise, it began to glow with the same bluish light as the mark. "Your grandmother," Raphael said softly. "She was a chosen one too, wasn't she?" Eleanor felt tears in her eyes as she remembered her grandmother, who always told stories about sacred places and magical symbols. At the time, she thought they were just tales to entertain a curious granddaughter. "She tried to prepare me, but I was too busy with my academic research to really listen." A sudden wind blew in from the sea, carrying with it a strange scent, something ancient and mystical. The symbols in the air began to spin faster, converging toward the mark on the stone. "It's happening now," Raphael said urgently. "The portal is opening. Eleanor, use your crystal." It's a key passed down from guardian to guardian. With trembling hands, Eleanor raised the crystal. The light emanating from it intensified, connecting with the floating symbols in a complex pattern she recognized from her visions. But before she could complete whatever was happening, a voice cut through the morning air. "Step away from the portal." 3 figures emerged from the shadows of the rocks, dressed in black. Their faces were covered by ritual masks that Eleanor recognized with a shiver. They were replicas of corrupted ceremonial masks, their sacred symbols twisted into patterns that hurt the eyes to look at. "The symbol hunters," Raphael murmured, positioning himself protectively in front of Eleanor and Marian. "They always appear when a portal is about to awaken." "Hand over the crystal," ordered one of the masked figures, his voice distorted by some kind of device, "and no one gets hurt." Eleanor gripped her crystal tighter, feeling it pulse like a heart in her hand. Her grandmother's stories came rushing back, warnings about those who sought to use the portals for their own dark purposes, who twisted sacred symbols into tools of power. "You don't understand," she said, stepping forward despite Raphael's silent protests. "These portals weren't meant to be controlled. They're bridges between worlds, paths of knowledge and evolution." "Knowledge is power," the masked figure replied, "and power must be controlled." The symbols in the air began to twist, as if reacting to the malevolent presence. The crystal in her hand grew hot, almost burning. "Eleanor," Marion called urgently, "look at the mark." The footprint on the rock was changing, its edges transforming into a spiraling pattern that spread across the stone's surface. The air around them began to ripple, like heat over hot asphalt. "We can't let them interfere with the awakening," Raphael warned. "If the portal is corrupted—" He didn't need to finish. Eleanor could feel in every fiber of her being that something catastrophic would happen if those malevolent people managed to control the portal's power. The wind picked up, carrying with it strange sounds. Ancient voices singing in long-forgotten tongues. The crystal in her hand pulsed stronger and stronger, in sync with her own heartbeat. It was then that Eleanor understood what she needed to do. Closing her eyes, she began to recite the words her grandmother had taught her so many years. Her words that had once seemed like nothing more than a lullaby, but now revealed their true meaning. The symbols in the air responded, dancing around her in a vortex of light and energy. The portal in the rock shone with blinding intensity, and for a moment, everyone there glimpsed something beyond, another world, another reality, full of possibilities and mysteries. And then Eleanor's true test began. Power flowed through Eleanor like an electric current, making every nerve in her body vibrate in harmony with the ancient symbols. The words of her grandmother's old lullaby spilled from her lips as if they had a life of their own, each syllable resonating with the pulse of the crystal in her hand. "No!" shouted the leader of the symbol hunters, charging toward her. "You don't know what you're doing. This power needs to be controlled, directed." But Eleanor knew with a certainty that came from the depths of her soul that he was wrong. The power of the portals was not something to be controlled. It was something to be understood, respected, preserved in its purest form. "Mary," she called without taking her eyes off the glowing portal, "I need you to recite with me. Do you remember the chant my grandmother always sang on full moon nights?" Marion hesitated for only a second before she began to sing, her academic voice joining Eleanor's in perfect harmony. Even though she wasn't a chosen one, her presence and her faith in her friend amplified the power of the moment. Raphael, meanwhile, had pulled an object from his bag that made the hunters step back. An ancient mirror, its frame adorned with the same symbols that floated in the air. "You've corrupted sacred symbols," he said to the masked figures, his voice brimming with power. "Now behold your true reflection." When he raised the mirror, the ritual masks of the hunters began to crack, revealing not faces, but vortices of distorted and darkened symbols, the physical manifestation of their spiritual corruption. The portal in the rock pulsed stronger and stronger, its bluish glow now mingled with other colors the human eye could barely comprehend. Through its rippling surface, Eleanor glimpsed alternate realities, an ancient San Diego, still inhabited by its original peoples, a possible future where technology and spirituality intertwined in harmony. Parallel dimensions where symbols were the very language of reality. It was then that she understood. The portals weren't just passages between places, they were bridges between possibilities. And their true purpose wasn't to transport people, but knowledge, wisdom, understanding. "Eleanor," Marion's voice cut through her revelation, "watch out." One of the hunters had managed to get close, his hands reaching out to grab the crystal, but before he could touch it, something extraordinary happened. All the symbols in the air converged on the point between Eleanor and the attacker, forming a barrier of pure light. The impact threw the hunter back, his mask finally shattering completely. The face revealed was young, frightened, human, a reminder that even those who choose dark paths are, deep down, people searching for answers. "You have a choice," Eleanor said softly, extending her free hand toward the young man. "The power you seek is already within you. It doesn't need to be corrupted or controlled. It needs to be awakened. For a moment, she saw hesitation in the young man's eyes, but the leader of the hunters yanked him back abruptly. "Don't listen to these lies. Power must be taken, controlled, used." "No," Eleanor replied, her voice now carrying the weight of millennia of wisdom. "Power must be understood." With these words, she raised the crystal toward the portal. The ancient chant reached its climax, and suddenly the air around them seemed to compress before exploding into a million points of light. Eleanor felt herself being pulled in every direction at once, her physical body almost unable to contain the energy flowing through it. Glimpses of other lives, other realities, other times flooded her mind. Her grandmother, as a young guardian, learning the same secrets, ancient civilizations erecting the first portals, the unwritten future, full of infinite possibilities. "Make your choice," a familiar voice echoed in her mind, the same voice she had heard during her near-death experience. "The portal is open, but the path it reveals depends on you." With crystal clarity, Eleanor understood that this was the true test. It wasn't about power or control, it was about wisdom and purpose. The portal didn't need to be activated or awakened. It had always been active, waiting only for someone who understood its true nature. "I choose to understand," she declared, her voice resonating with an authority she didn't know she possessed. "I choose to preserve. I choose to protect." The crystal in her hand exploded into light, no longer just blue, but in every color imaginable, and some beyond human comprehension. The symbols in the air began to rearrange themselves, forming increasingly complex and meaningful patterns. And then, something began to emerge from the portal, not a passage to another place, but a revelation. That would forever change Eleanor's understanding of the true nature of the symbols and their role in the universe. From the portal emanated not light, but pure understanding. Eleanor found herself immersed in a stream of ancestral knowledge that transcended words or images. It was as if each symbol were a key, unlocking a new chamber of understanding in her mind. "The portals," she whispered, awestruck. "They were never meant for physical transport." "No," Raphael confirmed, his voice choked with emotion. "They are living libraries, repositories of ancient wisdom." The symbol hunters stood frozen, their broken masks revealing expressions of shock and confusion. The young man Eleanor had tried to reach stepped forward, removing what remained of his mask. "My name is Daniel," he said, his voice trembling. "They told us the portals were sources of power, that we could use them to change the world." "And they are," Eleanor replied gently. "But not in the way you thought." Through the floating portal, images began to form. Ancient peoples performing healing rituals using sacred symbols, shamans entering trances to access higher knowledge, ancestral scholars recording their discoveries in mystical codes that transcended languages and cultures. Marian, though not a chosen one, could feel the magnitude of the moment. Her years of academic research on ancient symbology took on a new dimension. "Eleanor," she called, her voice barely containing her excitement, "this changes everything. We thought we knew about ancient civilizations. And about ourselves," Eleanor added, still absorbing the flow of revelations. The leader of the hunters, however, was not convinced. "Knowledge without power is useless," he shouted, his voice distorted by anger. "You are weak, wasting the true potential of these portals." Raphael turned to him with an expression of pity. "True power lies in understanding, not in control. That's why you've never truly been able to access the portals. Your intentions blinded you to their true nature." Eleanor felt a new presence manifesting through the portal, a familiar energy that made her heart ache with longing. "Grandma," she whispered. The figure of her grandmother didn't appear physically, but her essence was there, mingling with the ancestral energies of the portal. Through this connection, Eleanor began to receive a series of revelations that made her role as the chosen one even clearer. "The symbols are alive," she began to explain, the words flowing naturally as knowledge poured into her consciousness. "Each one is a frequency, a specific vibration that resonates with different aspects of reality. When someone tries to corrupt them, it distorts that frequency, creating dissonance in the very fabric of existence. Daniel and a few other former hunters approached, drawn by the truth in her words. The leader, seeing that he was losing his followers, drew an object from his robes, a ritual dagger covered in distorted symbols. "If we can't control the power of the portals," he snarled, "then no one will be able to access them." He lunged toward the mark on the rock, the dagger raised with clear intent to destroy. But before he could reach it, the symbols in the air themselves intervened. They condensed around him, forming a kind of cocoon of light that immobilized him. "The symbols protect themselves," Raphael explained, stepping closer to the paralyzed man, "just as the truth always finds a way to come to light." Through the portal, the flow of knowledge continued. Eleanor saw the true history of the Chosen Ones throughout the centuries, discreet guardians who kept the true meaning of the sacred symbols alive, protecting them from attempts at corruption and misuse. "Each Chosen One has a unique role," she realized aloud. "Raphael, you are a protector, guarding the secrets of the portals. I am an interpreter, destined to translate this ancestral knowledge for the modern world." Marian, who had been frantically taking notes on her tablet, looked up with a sudden realization. "That's why you always had this incredible ability to make connections between different symbol systems in your research. You were already an interpreter, even before fully awakening." The sun was now high in the sky, its light dancing through the still visible energies around the portal. The floating symbols began to settle, returning to a more subtle state, though still perceptible to those who knew how to see. "What happens now?" Daniel asked, his voice heavy with the weight of someone who had just had their entire world turned upside down. Eleanor looked at the crystal in her hand, which now pulsed with a soft, steady light. "Now we begin the real work," she replied. "There is much knowledge to recover, much to understand, and most importantly, much to protect." The portal began, to return to its original state of apparent inactivity, but Eleanor now knew that it was never truly inactive. Like all the other portals scattered along the Brazilian coast, it was a constant source of wisdom, waiting only for those who knew how to access it properly. A new journey was beginning, not just for Eleanor, but for everyone present, and with it, a new understanding of the true meaning of power and knowledge. Back in New York, Eleanor's apartment had turned into an impromptu operations center. Marian had covered an entire wall with a map of the Brazilian coast, marking all the locations where supposed footprints of St. Thomas existed. Raphael and Daniel, the former hunter now turned ally, were helping to correlate these points with ancient indigenous roots and historical records. "It's incredible," Marian commented, connecting points on the map with colored lines. "When you overlay the portal locations with the main pre-Columbian ceremonial centers, it forms a perfectly symmetrical pattern." Eleanor, sitting in her favorite armchair with the red notebook on her lap, smiled at her friend's enthusiasm. Since the revelations in San Diego 3 days ago, they had barely slept, absorbing and cataloging the vast knowledge that had been revealed. "What still puzzles me," Daniel said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was relearning everything. "They thought they knew, is why some of us can see the symbols and others can't. Perhaps the question isn't about being able or not being able," Eleanor replied, a new understanding forming in her mind. "Maybe it's about being ready to see." Raphael, who was organizing a series of old photographs, looked up with interest. "How so?" "During my near-death experience," Eleanor explained, "I saw how symbols are connected to different levels of consciousness. It's not a matter of innate ability, but of gradual awakening." She stood up, walking over to the wall of symbols she had started drawing. Each one now pulsed softly with its own unique frequency, visible only to the chosen. "The portals aren't just repositories of knowledge," she continued, touching one of the oldest symbols. "They're catalysts for spiritual awakening. Everyone who comes into contact with them is affected in some way, even if they don't realize it consciously. Like ripples in a pond," Marian suggested, her academic mind quickly making connections. "Each portal emits a frequency that expands in concentric circles, affecting everything and everyone around it." "Exactly," Eleanor exclaimed, "and the more people awaken to this reality, the stronger the effect becomes," Raphael finished. an expression of understanding dawning on his face. That's why the hunters were so dangerous. By trying to control and corrupt the symbols, they were literally distorting the energy field around the portals. Daniel shuddered, remembering his time with the hunters. The leader. He always said we were doing humanity a favor, making the power of the symbols more accessible, but in reality, we were creating interference, Eleanor concluded gently, like static on a radio transmission. At that moment, the crystal around Eleanor's neck began to pulse with a more intense light. The symbols on the wall responded, starting to dance in a pattern she recognized immediately. Another portal is manifesting, she announced, her eyes following the movement of the symbols. But it's different this time. It's as if they're all awakening at the same time, Raphael added, his own crystal, an ancient blue stone set in silver, also beginning to glow. Marian ran to the map, her eyes wide. Look, the points, they form a mandala when connected like this. Eleanor felt a wave of energy rush through her body, bringing with it another revelation. It's not just a mandala, she whispered. It's a key. The portals aren't isolated points. They're part of a larger system, a collective awakening, mechanism programmed to activate at a specific moment. And that moment is now, Daniel concluded, his voice trembling with the magnitude of the realization. The air in the apartment grew thick with energy, and for a moment everyone could see, even Marian, how the symbols connected, forming a complex web of light and meaning that extended far beyond those walls. We need to prepare, Eleanor said, her voice carrying a new urgency. What happened in San Diego was just the beginning. If all the portals are truly awakening, the hunters must be noticing too, Raphael warned. That leader we captured wasn't the only one. There are other groups, other factions. Then, we need to be faster, Marian declared, already starting to make new notes. If we can map the activation pattern of the portals, it's not about speed, Eleanor interrupted gently. It's about being in the right place at the right time with the right intention. She walked to the window, gazing at the city stretching out to the horizon. Somewhere out there, others were beginning to awaken, to see beyond the veil of ordinary reality. The knowledge hidden within the portals was gradually revealing itself, not through dramatic events, but through small moments of understanding, connection, and awakening. Our mission isn't to control this process, she continued, but to facilitate it, to ensure that the awakening happens harmoniously, that the knowledge is preserved and shared appropriately. Daniel stepped closer to the map, his eyes fixed on the points marking the portals. What about the other hunters? Many of them, like me, were deceived. Maybe if we could reach them? Yes, Eleanor smiled, feeling a new wave of understanding flow through her. That's also part of our mission. Awakening isn't just about knowledge, it's about healing, reconciliation, transformation. The sun began to set, painting the sky of New York with surreal colors that seemed to dance with the symbols still visible in the air. A new phase was beginning, not just for them, but for all of humanity, and this time they were ready to lead the way. Dawn found Eleanor and her group already on the move. The crystal around her neck hadn't stopped pulsing all night, and the symbols on her apartment wall had formed a clear pattern. All the portals would activate simultaneously. During the next equinox, which was less than 24 hours away, it's a moment of perfect alignment, Raphael explained as he drove along Route 66. The equinox has always been considered a sacred time by virtually all ancient cultures. In the back seat, Marian frantically consulted her notes. The references I found suggest that the original peoples of Brazil were already aware of these activation cycles. They performed specific ceremonies during the equinoxes. The hunters know this too, Daniel warned, his face tense. I've received messages from other former members. Several groups are mobilizing, planning to interfere with the activation of the portals. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the energies flowing through the landscape. Even from inside the car, she could sense how the natural symbols, in the rock formations, the patterns of the clouds, even in the flight of the birds, were aligning, preparing for the great moment. We can't be at all the portals at once, she pondered, opening her eyes. We need to trust that other chosen ones are also preparing, even if we don't know them yet. But how will we know if we're in the right place? Marion asked. In response, Eleanor's crystal glowed more intensely. Simultaneously, all the electronic devices in the car, phones, GPS, even the vehicle's dashboard, began displaying strange patterns, ancient symbols dancing across the digital screens. Modern technology is responding too, Eleanor observed, marveling. It's as if the symbols are finding new ways to manifest themselves, Raphael nodded. The ancients always knew this moment would come. They encoded this knowledge within the symbols themselves, waiting for the time when humanity would be ready for the next step in its evolution. The car wound its way along the coastal road, and Eleanor could feel the energy building. Each portal along the coastline was beginning to awaken, their frequencies harmonizing into a cosmic symphony that only the chosen could fully perceive. Suddenly, Daniel straightened in his seat. Something's wrong. This energy, it's distorted. Eleanor also felt it, a dissonance in the natural harmony of the symbols, like a discordant note in a perfect orchestra. The hunters, she whispered. They've already begun. Raphael immediately understood the gravity of the situation. They're trying to interfere with the harmonization process. If they manage to corrupt even one of the portals during the convergence, the entire system could collapse, Eleanor finished, a shiver running down her spine. Marion, though unable to see the symbols, could feel the rising tension. What can we do? Eleanor closed her eyes again, letting her consciousness expand. The visions she had received during her near-death experience returned with newfound clarity. We need to go to Key West, she declared. The main portal is there. But what about the other portals? Daniel asked. Trust the process, Eleanor replied, a deep certainty in her voice. Each chosen one is being guided to where they need to be. Our part is to ensure the main portal remains pure. Raphael was already changing the car's direction, heading toward Santa Barbara, where they would catch the ferry to Key West. The sky above them was shifting, clouds forming patterns that mirrored the ancient symbols. As they neared their destination, Eleanor could sense other presences moving in the same direction, some with pure intentions, others not so much. It was as if all the players of a cosmic drama were converging on the final stage. Look, Marion pointed toward the horizon. A column of bluish light rose from the island, visible even in broad daylight. For the chosen ones, it was possible to see that the light was composed of thousands of intertwined symbols, each pulsating with its own unique frequency. It's begun, Raphael murmured. Eleanor felt her crystal vibrate with an almost painful intensity. Through it, she could sense how all the portals along the Brazilian coast were beginning to resonate in unison, their energies amplifying one another. But she could also feel the forces trying to interfere with this process, the hunters and other groups, seeking to control or corrupt the power of the symbols. It was a battle that transcended the physical, happening on multiple levels of reality, simultaneously. When they finally reached the ferry to Key West, the sky was covered in clouds forming spirals and intricate mandalas. The sea was restless, its waves moving in patterns that defied the normal laws of physics. Ready? Eleanor asked, looking at each of her companions. They nodded silently, each understanding the magnitude of the moment. It wasn't just about protecting a portal or preserving ancestral knowledge. It was about ensuring that the next step in the evolution of human consciousness happened the right way. And so as the ferry cut through the turbulent waters toward the island, Eleanor felt that everything in her life, the accident, her academic research, her grandmother's stories, had been preparation for this moment. The great test was about to begin. Key West was unrecognizable. The column of light rising from its highest point had expanded, creating a kind of tropical aurora that covered the entire island. The symbols in the air were so dense that even the locals and tourists who normally wouldn't notice them began to sense something extraordinary happening. As Eleanor and her group climbed the trail leading to the main portal, they encountered others converging on the same point. Some were clearly chosen, their crystals glowing in different colors. Others were hunters, their distorted energies creating interference in the harmonic field of the symbols. It's bigger than we imagined, Raphael remarked, observing the various groups. It seems that everyone connected to the symbols has been summoned. Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. Her crystal pulsed stronger and stronger, syncing with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Through it, she could sense how the portals along the entire Brazilian coast were reaching a state of perfect resonance. Marian, even without being able to see all the mystical details, was documenting everything on her tablet. "It's incredible," she exclaimed. "The weather patterns, the cloud formations, even the behavior of the animals, everything is following perfect mathematical sequences." When they reached the top, they found a surreal scene. Dozens of people formed a natural circle around a rock formation that, to the chosen ones, glowed with ancient symbols. At the center, the leader of the hunters they had faced in San Diego was free and conducting a ritual with other followers. "They're trying to force an artificial connection with the portals," Daniel warned, recognizing the movements. "If they succeed, they could corrupt the entire awakening process." Eleanor felt a wave of understanding flow through her. "No," she said softly. "They are exactly where they need to be." Before anyone could question her, she began walking toward the center of the circle. The symbols in the air danced around her, creating increasingly complex patterns. Her crystal now shone with all the colors of the spectrum, its light pulsing at a frequency that made all the other crystals resonate in harmony. "Stop her!" shouted the leader of the hunters. "She's going to ruin everything." But when his followers tried to move forward, the symbols in the air themselves formed barriers, not aggressively but gently guiding everyone to their correct positions. "You don't understand," Eleanor spoke, her voice carrying a calm power that reached everyone present. "There is no us and them. The awakening is for everyone." As she spoke, memories of her near-death experience flowed through her. But now they were not just her memories. She could see and feel the experiences of everyone present, the fears and aspirations of the hunters, the dedication of the other chosen ones, the sincere quest for knowledge of each person there. "The portals," she continued, stepping into the center of the circle, "are not tools of power or control. They are mirrors of our own collective consciousness." The crystal around her neck began to levitate, connecting through beams of light with all the other crystals present. Even those who did not possess crystals felt the energy flowing through them. "For millennia, we have guarded these symbols, protected this knowledge." Her voice now seemed to come from everywhere at once, not to keep it separate, but to preserve it until the moment we could truly understand it. The leader of the hunters stepped forward, his face a mask of conflict. "But power, control. It's an illusion," Eleanor smiled gently. "True power lies in understanding that we are all part of something greater." At that moment, the equinox reached its exact point. All the portals along the Brazilian coast activated simultaneously, creating a network of light visible from space. In Key West, the symbols in the air began to spin faster and faster, forming a vortex of pure energy. Eleanor felt her consciousness expand, connecting with every person present, with every active portal, with every manifested symbol. Through this connection, ancient knowledge began to flow, not as raw information, but as direct understanding. Everyone there experienced, each in their own way, a version of what Eleanor had lived through in her near-death experience. They saw the true nature of the symbols, understood their role in the awakening of human consciousness, and felt the deep interconnectedness of all things. The hunters, one by one, dropped their masks, no longer needing to hide behind corrupted symbols. The leader himself fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as decades of distorted understanding dissolved under the light of truth. Marian, even without being a chosen one, felt her heart open to a new form of understanding that transcended her academic mind. Raphael and Daniel, each in their unique role, helped stabilize and harmonize the energies flowing through the portal. When the vortex of symbols finally began to calm, something fundamental had changed, not just in those present, but in everyone connected to the portals along the coast. A seed of awakening had been planted, a new path of evolution opened. "And now?" someone asked amidst the reverent silence that followed. Eleanor smiled, feeling the presence of her grandmother and all the guardians who had come before her. Now we begin the true journey. The portals will remain active. The symbols will continue to guide us, but in a new way. No longer as secrets to be protected, but as bridges to our own transformation. The sun began to set, painting the sky with impossible colors. The symbols, though less intense, remained visible to all who now knew how to look. A new era was beginning, not with a great cataclysm or a dramatic revolution, but with a gentle and profound awakening of the collective consciousness. Eleanor looked at her companions, at the former hunters, at all the people gathered there, and saw in their eyes the same understanding. They were both the guardians and the beneficiaries of this new knowledge. The real work was just beginning, and this time they would do it together.